Hi, my name's Adam Hacker, and this is my genre analysis presentation. The topic I chose today is the 1500-hour rule that was put in place by the FAA, which stands for the Federal Aviation Administration, because of a problem that happened back in 2009 with Colgan Air Flight 3407. That was a Bombardier plane, which is a small dual prop plane. It carries about, I think, 50 people. And what happened is both pilots ended up putting the plane into a stall, and no one could figure out how to fix that. Which, in the piloting world, a stall is one of the very first things you learn about and how to fix it. So it's a simple solution to a problem that shouldn't have happened, but because that it did, the solution to that problem is very simple, and they couldn't figure out what to do. So I'm choosing to compare an article from the FAA and thoughts and opinions from the website Reddit. So to start out, it's the FAA article. We know that it's a press release article because Washington is in complete caps, and from there, it's a very formal and very dry, formal, and informative way of writing, as you can see with the examples given. The intended audience are going to be pilots, aspiring pilots, FAA check airmen, which are essentially the people that check out the pilots for their flying test. It's kind of like when someone goes to get a driver's license, they have to do a ride along with a person to make sure that they can do it. That's what an FAA check airman is. Flight schools, airlines, and people affected by the crash. So previous knowledge, it's definitely going to be people familiar with flight. This article is not intended for people that are just interested in what happened. There's a lot of instances of jargon and like what's happening, and or I should say what is going to happen because of this, in a really detailed fashion. It's not just, hey, pilots are now going to need 1,500 hours. It lays out pretty much regulation changes and all sorts of stuff that are completely mind-numbing to even pilots. So because of the tone and language is very objective, it's serious, and you can see to the right, the rule requires first officers, also known as co-pilots, to hold an airline transport pilot ATP certificate requiring 1,500 hours total time as a pilot. Previously, first officers were required to have only a commercial pilot certificate, which requires 250 hours of flight time. So that's about as dry as it can get. And to kind of go off the previous knowledge slide, pilots were only required to have 250 hours before they increased it to 1,500. So it was a substantial increase, and it wasn't just like a minor increase to what was known as, or what was being done before. The purpose is to then inform, persuade in a way. There were quotes given in the article, and it essentially talks about how this is really going to increase safety. There's multiple quotes given in a similar fashion, really advocating how safe things are going to be because of this, when really two pilots just messed up. There's kind of a big debate within the pilot community if this is effective. 1,500-hour rule is, or I should say, doesn't necessarily mean that you're a better pilot. Someone could fly 1,500 hours strictly autopilot, versus someone who's flying 1,500 hours without autopilot, so they're flying classic 1940s type flying. There's no automation, and who's the better pilot? Well, when it comes to situations like Colgan faced, the person who flew without any automation because they're more familiar with the aircraft. Autopilot you become complacent, and also is meant to give closure to families affected by the crash. They were big advocates for the 1,500-hour rule, and then that became popular within the general public, which was then forced upon the FAA, and that's kind of how the 1,500-hour rule became. And now, this is the genre analysis of Reddit. and Reddit is a forum site. We know this because it's all the content on Reddit is generally user generated, or at least individuals find certain articles and post it to the site. To piggyback off that, there are handles, which are like screen names or whatever for users. So what I have highlighted in orange are their handles: Pilot Paul, Crop Duster, and Strange Chicken ST. To the right of that, they have points, which are essentially, they're called upvotes, and the more points means the more people that see it, the less points means the less people that see it, because it'll be higher up on a list. And to go off the forum genre, you can see that it is personal opinion. People just say what they want. The intended audience is going to be similar to the FAA article. It's going to be pilots, aspiring pilots. And within that, obviously, will be maybe people that work at airports or FAA check airmen. But it's just a way for pilots to talk about flying and. So previous knowledge is going to be, once again, very similar to people that read or have read the FAA article or just visit the FAA website in general. Pretty much every pilot has to visit the FAA website at one point in time, and so they're familiar with it, although they may not choose to frequent it like they would Reddit. So that means they're similar communities, but I would argue that the Reddit community is probably made up of a lot younger pilots. I would say that older generation pilots do not frequent Reddit. They probably get a lot of their information from the FAA website or a site that's called AOPA, which is kind of like an organization for pilots. Because of that, the tone and language on Reddit is very informal, bitter, ironic, pessimistic, playful, satiric, and critical. It really varies on the thread, the topic. I mean, who's commenting? It can be basically anything or everything and anything. So here's an example. Why was that the last straw? What were you doing to build time? As you can see, it's a pretty condescending, pessimistic way to start off a comment, which is pretty common on Reddit for someone who maybe disagrees with what you're saying. It's kind of just how it goes sometimes. The purpose of our flying would be to inform and persuade, which the FAA article kind of shares the inform and persuade. Obviously, Reddit has a much greater kind of persuasive impact than the FAA article does, and from there, the purpose is to give personal input and opinions, expression, humor, and sharing the love of flight. So in conclusion, both communities are interested in flight. Reddit is just an outlet to share the love for flight. The FAA is strictly informative. One allows information and expression while the other is strictly informative. I just said that. Language is used very differently, and it's very opposite end of the spectrum from one another. So the language on the FAA site is very formal, sorry, and the language used on Reddit is very informal. So because of that, the purpose will be similar. It's just a different medium used. Thank you. That's my presentation.